It's often been said that the common new player experience in Path of Exile is to have this happen, take one look at this, and then do this. Well, time to change that. Hey there, my name is Salendrak and welcome to my Path of Exile guide for total beginners. I've been playing Path of Exile on and off since its beta days back in 2011, and though I would never claim to be as knowledgeable about the game as many other content creators, I've played more than enough to help new players get started. And besides, making beginner's guides is kind of my thing. This total beginner's guide to Path of Exile will consist of 4 parts, and they are intended for players who are brand new to Path of Exile, or who, for whatever reason, just never really got into the game or progressed very far. In them, I will go over the game's various modes and mechanics to give you a solid foundation that will enable you to enjoy the game, whether you plan on casually playing a few hours here and there, or want to springboard into more advanced topics and strategies, including the endgame. In this video, I'll cover league selection, explain core attributes and the organization of the passive skill tree, and describe all of the classes of the game and what they tend to be used for, with the goal of helping you get started playing the game on the right foot. In the second guide, I'll go over game settings you'll likely want to tweak, and give a whole bunch of tips and information that will help you play the game without using any sort of a build guide, so you can make it through all 10 acts of the main story campaign all on your own. Then in the third video, I'll bestow upon you additional knowledge that will help you get unstuck if you get bogged down in the campaign, as well as explain how to buy items from other players, discuss the basics of crafting, and show you how to find ideas that might help you fix a bad build. And in the fourth and final episode of the series, I'll cover microtransactions, explain how to sell items to other players, teach you how to find and use beginner-friendly build guides, and provide you with additional information that will help you transition into successfully playing in the post-campaign endgame. I'm making this video in early 2023 in the Forbidden Sanctum League, but be sure to check the pinned comment below should anything in this video become obsolete or need correction. And as with all my guide videos, timestamps are down in the description so you can hop around between topics or come back later to review them as needed. The description will also have links to other helpful resources and information that you should definitely check out. Now let's get to it! Before we start making a new character and start playing the game, there are a couple of PoE structural basics that you'll need to understand, as they relate to a couple of decisions you'll need to make when creating a new character. The first of which is whether you want to play in the Standard League or play in the Challenge League, and before you can decide that, you need to know what they are. Path of Exile officially released way back in 2013 after multiple years of betas, and since then has grown and expanded with more than 24 major updates. When a big update first comes out, it is released as part of a Challenge League, with new leagues and hence new updates currently coming out about every 3 or 4 months. You can kind of think of these leagues as an open beta for the new content, which also usually brings with it a number of balance changes, such as buffs and nerfs to various skills and character builds, as well as new items, removal of old items, and changed game mechanics. As such, Path of Exile is almost constantly evolving and gets a new coat of paint every couple of months. Once a Challenge League ends, the special league mechanics introduced in that league are frequently but not always incorporated into the base game, and if they are, they will thereafter be present in the ongoing Standard League and will also appear in future Challenge Leagues. If they are not incorporated into the base game, then you'll have missed out on the opportunity to play those mechanics if you didn't play in the Challenge League when it was active. Any characters played in a Challenge League will still be playable once the league ends, however, they will automatically be moved into the Standard League where they will be stuck forever and will never be playable in a future Challenge League. This is because every new Challenge League basically resets the game, and all players will start over from scratch with no characters already in the new league and no items. This means the trade economy will also be starting over from scratch, which can be really fun and exciting. Consequently, the vast majority of the player base and almost all noteworthy content creators and streamers basically spend most, if not all, of their time in the current Challenge League. Now, that doesn't mean that the Standard League is dead or that it's not worth playing in, especially as a brand new player, as there are still plenty of people actively playing in Standard, particularly those that aren't interested in trying out new league mechanics or those who just like to take things really slow and continue building up characters over a longer period of time than the Challenge League allows. So that brings us to the first question. As a new player, should you play in the Standard League or the Challenge League? And I believe that the best answer to that question is both it depends and it probably doesn't matter very much, especially if this is your first character. The reason I say that is because Path of Exile is an extremely complex game, and as a new player you'll likely want to take it slow as you move through the game and learn how everything works. As such, you'll mostly want to focus on the game's most basic features and mechanics, and won't want to spend much time on any of the league mechanics, whether it's the new additions from the current Challenge League or past league mechanics that are still present in the game. Because let's be honest, if you're new to the game, it will likely take you quite a while just to get through the 10 acts of the main story campaign, let alone get to the endgame atlas, which is where you'll typically end up doing all of the league stuff anyways. Probably the biggest factor on whether you should start in the Challenge League or just go with Standard on a first character is whether the Challenge League recently started or if it's about to end. If it's about to end, I would probably just start in Standard, experience the game for a while, get as far as you can, and once a new league starts, decide whether you want to give it a try or not. But if a new league is only days, weeks, or maybe up to a month or two old, go ahead and give the league a try, as you'll also have the benefit of a new and active trading ecosystem, updated character guides, and the exciting frenzy, and sometimes despair, that is attendant with new leagues in Path of Exile. One final thing I'll note before moving on is that there is one big headache that arises when Challenge League characters get moved into Standard if you choose to continue playing those characters in the Standard League. The developers have not yet created a way for the items you had stored in your stash during a Challenge League to be integrated into your Standard League stash. So if you've been playing in the Challenge League, once it ends and you open your Standard League stash, you'll be confronted with a bunch of remove-only stash tabs, and it's honestly a pain in the ass to clean these things up, especially if they have lots of items in them. Consequently, once individual players start to play in the Challenge Leagues regularly, they also tend to end up playing in the Challenge Leagues exclusively. I personally tend to delete most of my characters once they're booted to Standard League, as I like to keep things neat and tidy, and the Standard League stash ends up being anything but that. Once you've decided on whether to play in the Standard League or the Challenge League, you'll also need to decide whether you want to play Hardcore or not. You can basically think of Hardcore as a league within a league composed entirely of characters that have never died. For if they do die, then that character will come back alive as a non-hardcore character forever removed from the hardcore community. And as a new player, there's really no reason to choose hardcore, as you're definitely going to die sooner or later and end up in non-hardcore anyways. I'll also briefly mention another option that gets unlocked once you've finished most of Act 3 on at least one character, called Solo Self-Found, or SSF for short. This game mode is a true solo experience where you can neither party nor trade with other players, though your stash is shared between your solo self-found characters in the same league, whether challenge or standard, hardcore or not. The lack of trading can limit your potential build options and generally isn't recommended for extremely new players, though once you've gotten the basics of the game under your belt, it can be a fun way to mix things up to see how far you can get without being able to trade for good gear. And finally, as of the 3.20 Forbidden Sanctum League, there is also now a new Ruthless mode, and all I'm going to say about it is you do not want to start out in Ruthless mode as a new player. Before we go any further, pick a class and make a new character, we need to talk about the elephant in the room, the passive skill tree. I personally think it's a thing of beauty, but new players often see only a tangled mess too complicated to even hope to comprehend, much less actually use. But once you understand the basics, it's really not bad. And before we get to the tree itself, we need to talk about some closely related concepts and mechanics, starting with core attributes. In Path of Exile, there are 3 basic core attributes that every character has, and they are Strength, Dexterity, and Intelligence. Varying levels of these attributes are needed to equip the different skill gems in the game, with Strength being the primary attribute for red gems, Intelligence the primary attribute for blue gems, and Dexterity the primary attribute for green gems. Similarly, varying levels of these core attributes are needed to equip the different types of weapons and armor in the game, with strength being related to heavy armor, which gives armor rating that reduces incoming physical damage, dexterity being related to medium armor that provides evasion for a chance to evade enemy physical and ranged attacks, and intelligence being related to light armor that provides energy shield, which absorbs most types of damage before any damage is applied to your life pool. In terms of weapons, strength tends to relate to big two-handed weapons that are used for physical attacks, intelligence tends to align with spell and elemental damage boosting weapons, while dexterity tends to correspond to ranged weapons and fast one-handed melee weapons. In addition to allowing you to equip skill gems, weapons, and armor, the primary attributes also provide certain inherent bonuses, with strength boosting your life and physical attack damage, intelligence increasing your mana and energy shield, and dexterity increasing your accuracy and evasion. All this talk about core attributes relates to the passive skill tree because the tree itself can be divided into 3 areas that correspond to those 3 core attributes, and within or near those areas is where you'll usually tend to find specific skills that also relate to those attributes and the types of offensive and defensive playstyles that tend to correlate to them. Specifically, the top third of the tree is where you'll find lots of nodes that give you raw intelligence points, and plenty of nodes that boost stats related to intelligence-based gear and blue-colored skill gems such as energy shield, mana, and mana regeneration, as well as spell, minion, and elemental types of damage and related stats such as cast speed and spell critical strike. The bottom left third of this tree corresponds to strength, with lots of nodes directly increasing that core attribute, as well as nodes that increase life and life regeneration, armor, and physical attack damage, as well as other stats related to red-colored skill gems. And the bottom right third of the tree is, of course, related to dexterity, with lots of nodes that give you that attribute, that increase your evasion and accuracy, and that benefit playstyles that use dexterity-based gear and green-colored skill gems. Once you start to understand that basic organization of the passive skill tree, it starts to make a whole lot more sense. And as you zoom in on specific areas, you'll recognize that there are lots of little clusters of skills that provide similar and related perks. You'll also notice that there are varying sizes of skills on the skill tree. The smallest skills are known as basic passives, and they provide only minor benefits to your character, with many duplicated basic passives scattered all over the tree. These are basically taken only to gain access to better, bigger nodes, and are rarely taken solely for what they provide. The medium-sized skills are known as notable passives, and they provide very nice benefits to your character, with each specific notable on the tree being unique. And the largest skills, which are also unique, are known as Keystone passives, and they generally provide build-defining effects for your character. However, they often greatly change the way certain aspects of your character function, so they need to be selected with care, as a bad choice can sometimes create more problems than benefits if you don't build around the Keystone properly. Some passives are clustered around a mastery passive skill, and there will be several matching masteries on the tree with related nodes around them. Whenever you've allocated a notable passive in the cluster around a mastery, you will thereafter be able to select one of the perks listed in the mastery node, but can only select each mastery perk once, even if you've activated multiple nodes of the same type of mastery. So for example, there are lots of life mastery nodes scattered all over the tree, but each mastery skill only gives you access to the same 6 options, each of which can only be taken once. The final 2 types of passive nodes are jewel sockets, of which there are 2 types. The first type is a basic jewel socket, and they are scattered equally around the skill tree. Jewels are special items that can be placed into these sockets, giving you whatever perks are present on the jewel item. By contrast, large jewel sockets are where you can place endgame cluster jewels, which, if they have the right mods and notables present, can provide powerful and highly customizable benefits to your character. And that's my basic overview of the passive skill tree. But how do you actually use the thing? Well, I'll get to that more in the next video, but for now just remember that there is a search function on the tree itself that will let you search for any term that might be present on the skill tree. So, for example, if you're thinking of making a character that deals fire damage, You can enter that into the search field and all matching nodes will start to flash. But again, I'll go over more about how to choose skills to take in my next video in the series. Now that you understand the basic organization of the passive skill tree, it's time to get back to making a new character. There are 6 basic character classes available when you first start the game, with the 7th, the Scion, becoming available when you free her from the end of Act 3 of the main story campaign. Character classes are gender-locked and non-customizable, but other than visual appearance and voiceover dialogues, your choice of class basically only determines 3 things in the game, 2 of which are actually pretty minor, but the third is extremely significant. The first 2 things your class determines, neither of which is terribly important, is the location of where you can start putting points into the passive skill tree and your character's starting core attributes. And the reason I say these aren't terribly important is because the starting attributes are all low enough that they don't really matter in the long run. And the starting location also doesn't matter much because you can easily travel around the tree using connection paths, making it so that any class can pretty easily access all parts of the tree, though doing so isn't necessarily advisable. What does matter though from initial class selection is the fact that each class will later have access to a separate mini skill tree known as the Ascendancy skill tree, with each of the 6 basic classes having 3 unique mini tree options. Ascendancy skill points are earned by completing the Lord's Labyrinth. This is a special dungeon located in Act 3, which has 4 difficulty levels that you'll be able to attempt at varying stages of the game, with each level awarding 2 Ascendancy points upon completion. With all that in mind, here's a quick overview of each of the classes and their Ascendancies and what they tend to be used for. The Marauder class starts out in the middle of the Strength section of the tree, and as such has easy access to lots of skills that boost life, armor, and physical attack damage. As such, he tends to favor heavy weapons and armor and is a frontline fighter that likes to get up close and personal with enemies. The Marauder's 3 Ascendancy classes are the Juggernaut, the Berserker, and the Chieftain. The Juggernaut is the textbook definition of a tank and is able to take quite a beating and remain standing, while the Berserker embodies the theory that the best defense is a good offense, yet able to sustain itself in fights with strong life-leeching abilities. Meanwhile, the Chieftain has skills that boost fire damage and totems, which is a special type of skill that can provide a wide variety of offensive and defensive capabilities. Moving around the tree clockwise, the Templar starts at the border between the strength and intelligence areas of the tree, and as such has easy access to a mix of passive skills related to those 2 attributes. His Ascendancy classes are the Inquisitor, the Hierophant, and the Guardian. The Inquisitor focuses on dealing elemental damage, whether through spells or attacks, and ends up being quite tanky through its use of consecrated ground, while the Hierophant leverages boosts to mana and mana regeneration, and then links those to boosted damage output and defenses with a focus on totems and brand skills. By contrast, the Guardian has powerful aura boosting abilities and is great for party play as a support character, or is alternatively a strong choice for various minion builds. Up at the top of the skill tree is one of my personal favorites, the Witch, who starts in the middle of the intelligence area of the tree. This is your typical spellcaster archetype that excels at damage output, but done right can also be quite tanky. Her Ascendancies are the Necromancer, the Elementalist, and the Occultist. Unsurprisingly, the Necromancer focuses on undead minion builds, while the Elementalist is the go-to Ascendancy for premier fire, lightning, and/or cold-based spellcaster builds. But if you prefer the dark arts, there's the Occultist, who deals in curses, as well as cold and chaos damage over time skills. Witches are often recommended for new players, largely because spell-based builds tend to be easier to put together and use, since they tend to be more gear independent than other types of builds, and the Witch's starting location on the tree gives her prime access to the passives related to spell-based builds. Next around the tree is the Shadow, who is also very good for new players, who starts between the intelligence and dexterity areas of the tree. Given that location, he tends to focus on evasion and/or energy shield for defense, with a wide variety of options for damage output. His Ascendancies are the Assassin, the Saboteur, and the Trickster. The Assassin focuses on high critical strike and poison abilities while being elusive to avoid damage, while the Saboteur specializes in using trap and mine abilities, which have a wide variety of effects and is able to blind enemies to reduce incoming damage. Finally, the Trickster comes across as less specialized and has a more balanced toolkit for both offensive and defensive capabilities, allowing it to employ a wide variety of builds and playstyles. Next up is the Ranger, who starts in the middle of the Dexterity section of the tree. Often used as the quintessential bow-wielding class, though certainly able to use other weapons as well, her 3 ascensions are the Deadeye, the Raider, and the Pathfinder. The Deadeye is a projectile specialist, but is not restricted to just bows and can instead use wands as well as spells to deal damage from afar. By contrast, the Raider Ascendancy has more general combat and defensive boosting abilities, while the Pathfinder focuses on boosting the effects of flasks and can flexibly support both attack and spell-based builds. And last but certainly not least is the Duelist, starting on the border between the strength and dexterity areas at the bottom of the skill tree. With easy access to evasion, accuracy, and crit from the dexterity areas, as well as life, armor, and physical damage from the strength areas, there are no shortage of playstyles the Duelist is able to employ. His ascendancies are the Champion, the Slayer, and the Gladiator. Like the Marauder's Juggernaut, the Champion is a premier tank ascendancy and is a great choice if you have trouble staying alive, while the Slayer is offensively oriented with good life leech, accuracy, and damage boosting perks. The Gladiator, on the other hand, is a bit of a mix of offense and defense, leveraging shields for the latter and bleed effects for the former. And there you have the 6 original starting classes, where they start on the tree, and a general idea of what sorts of playstyles they tend to lend themselves to. But what about that 7th class, the Scion? Well, this one is a bit interesting, as she starts out in the very middle of the tree, and consequently has easy access to all areas of the passive skill tree. But unlike the other classes, which have 3 ascendancies each, the Scion only has a single ascendancy, the Ascendant, but it allows her to pick and choose from a limited number of options, giving a mix of perks from each of the other class's respective ascendancies. Because of this high degree of flexibility, this class is not recommended for new players unless you're following a well-explained build guide.
The dead will soon rise for me, not against me.
Hopefully by now you have an idea as to what sort of class and playstyle you think you might enjoy, and at this point you basically have 2 options for how you will likely want to proceed. Option 1, which is what I strongly recommend if you're truly playing Path of Exile for the first time, is to just pick whatever class most resonated with you or sounds the most fun based on my descriptions earlier, and then just start playing the game, feeling your way through it, learning as you go, and seeing how far you can get in maybe 10 to 20 hours worth of in-game playtime. And option 2, which is what I'd recommend after your first couple of characters, is to find a good beginner-friendly build guide to follow that will show you how to build and progress your character. Because let's face it, Path of Exile is an extremely complex game with an incredibly steep learning curve, where knowledge is power and the lack of knowledge is a big liability. But the reason I recommend option 1 for true beginners and option 2 for people with at least a little experience under their belts is for a couple of reasons. First, I fully understand that there are lots of gamers who prefer to learn games on their own terms, at their own pace, and with as little outside assistance as possible, at least when they're just starting out. And second, if as a true beginner you were to hop straight into following build guides, chances are you would feel like you're trying to read Greek and probably wouldn't understand much of anything, would mess things up or get lost in a hurry, and likely just end up quitting the game. I'll give several tips on how to do the option 1 DIY approach in the next 2 videos, and in the 4th video I'll explain how to find and use good beginner-friendly build guides. And before I wrap up this video, I want to give you some general tips that will apply to both options I just mentioned and will greatly benefit you as you start out on your journeys in Rayclast. Tip number 1, set reasonable expectations for yourself. If you aren't going to use build guides, and even if you are going to make a lot of mistakes along the way as you learn about how the game works, such as taking bad or even useless skill points for your build, not setting up your skill gems effectively, or having holes in your defenses, resulting in lots of deaths and halted progress. And that's okay. Sometimes these mistakes can be fixed, and sometimes they can be really hard to correct after the fact. and ultimately it might take several tries before you find a build that works and is able to get you through the main story campaign or very far into the post-campaign endgame. But so long as you're enjoying your playtime while learning about the game's mechanics, what works and what doesn't, then it will be time well spent. And once you've established a solid level of foundational knowledge and experience, you'll be able to effectively use build guides that will help you springboard into the endgame and enjoy all that Path of Exile has to offer. Tip number 2, read lots of stuff. Whether it's the little pop-up tutorials, the descriptions of what skill gems do, and even the tool tips that show up in various parts of the interface, there is a ton of information baked into the game that will help you understand how things work. Ignore them at your own peril. Now, I'm not suggesting that you should start reading through the descriptions of everything in the passive skill tree, but whenever something new presents itself, be sure to pay attention to it. Also, it's a good idea to refer to the wiki regularly, as there are lots of terms and ideas that are not explained in the game, such as what exactly certain buffs and debuffs do. All this reading will help to establish that foundational knowledge I talked about earlier that will help you later use and understand build guides and even become better at making your own builds. Tip number 3, enjoy the storyline of the main campaign. The world of Rayclast is full of interesting lore and mythology, which is mostly presented through a wide variety of NPC characters that are voice acted extremely well. All of this will give context for your quests and activities in the game, and even after you've been through the campaign several times, you may find that there are certain lines of dialogue that you just enjoy hearing again and again.
Bloody barnacles on me ass!
But particularly on your first time through, it's worth taking things slow and enjoying the journey, and later on you can learn how to speedrun and ignore all of the campaign stuff to get to the endgame ASAP. But that's it for this video. At this point, I would recommend you go ahead and start playing the game, making sure to read all the in-game tutorials and see if you can't get through at least the first couple of zones. And in my next video, I'll go over some basic tips for making your first few characters without using any build guides, along with a bunch of other important information you'll need to know about and understand. If you found the video helpful, informative, or at the very least somewhat entertaining, please be sure to hit that like button. And if you have any questions, be sure to let me know down in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers!